That better? Okay. Okay, page 9. We'll try to do the last 4 of the 10 verses tonight. Starting with this, maybe number 7. Number 7. So the Chinese goes, 众报虽也生，如梦不长时，念念常灭坏，如见后一耳. Literally, karma generated, produced, the myriad retributions follow. Like a dream, none of it is true or real. Thought after thought, constant decay brings cessation, as of the previous and subsequent pattern. So, at this point, we get a transition from the previous 6 verses, and we're transferring here to both to karma, and then to what generates, sustains karma, which is basically what is the holding dynamics of our lives. And the mind then is the second theme here. Mind is the determining factor. So here, basically, if we go back again, the question was, since living beings are fundamentally empty, that is, without a permanent, lasting nature, why does the Buddha need to liberate those empty beings? And the question was, if the Buddha sees living beings as not empty, then would be a lack of wisdom on the Buddha's part. On the other hand, if to see the living beings as empty and yet continue to try to liberate them, that would be foolish, or not to liberate them would be a lack of compassion. And so we know that the Buddha is described as someone who is complete with wisdom and compassion. So wisdom sees things as empty, compassion dives into it. What's going on here? And so this description here then is explaining, my computer is acting up. Let's get rid of this here. It's been doing this all day. So what the text is describing here is what living beings do to get into this fix, to get into the samsaric realm of suffering. And it says it's karma. When karma is generated, then basically the formula goes, because of misunderstanding, avidya, not seeing things clearly, we do things with body, speech, and mind, intentional actions that are at best mixed up, at worst unwholesome. And the result of that follows, one of the texts say, as the cart follows the yak, or the ox that's pulling it. So the mind is the ox, and what it's pulling, what pulls behind it are the retributions that follow. And yet, the text says, like a dream, none of it is true or real. Thought after constant decay brings cessation, as with previous and subsequent pattern. So what's this describing? Master Hua's commentary at this point is very interesting. He says, the thought after thought, constant decay brings cessation. This body becomes involved with all that karmic retribution. And in every thought after thought after thought, there's a process of it coming into being, dwelling, disintegrating, and cessation. So this is what it means when it says thought after thought, constant decay brings cessation. And then basically, but it's describing the pattern. So the pattern goes on, and yet there's nothing real or permanent because it doesn't have any nature of its own. So he says, and that goes on ceaselessly. There's a couple of passages here from some of the Pali texts. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya, And it's a wonderful poetic passage. It's living beings are owners of their karma. So this is basically our investment portfolio. Students of their karma. In other words, karma is a teacher and the student is, how do we say, the student is the one who sits at the feet of the karma and listens. Heirs of their karma, meaning inherit their karma. They have karma as a progenitor, which you could translate as their parents. And karma as their kin, it's a relationship. And karma as their homing place, which I thought was a bad translation. I thought it just meant home, but it's actually, homing place is kind of orienting and directing to a destination home. It's sort of like, once this is in motion, without even thinking about it, your habitual tendencies just start leaning in that direction, and it takes real effort and cultivation to catch that leading, tending towards. It is karma that differentiates beings according to inferiority and superiority. And this is from the Nikaya. So this is kind of placing the centrality of karma at the heart of what we do as human beings. And what's interesting here, we have our identities. We think, I'm the student of a particular school. I've inherited this amount of wealth or whatever. My home is this place or this country or this clan or nationality, and I have plans. And what this is saying, all of that is driven by karma. Your real country, your real home is karma. Your real parents that give birth to you is your karma. That which sustains you is your karma, and that's what you're going towards is your karma. Even if you think you willfully intend to go someplace else, karma will act like a force of gravity on the choices you have. It doesn't determine what you do, but it limits and shapes the possibilities of what's available to you. The heavier it is, the more it seems like you have no choice. So this is really an interesting description of the human condition. Anyhow, now on the other part of that, this is from the Visuddhimagga, which goes to this idea of like a dream, none of it is true or real. And here's the passage. No doer of the deeds is found, meaning there's no essential person here. No one ever reaps their fruits. This is, again, the non-essential self. Empty phenomena roll on. This view alone is right and true. And then the second part goes, and while the deeds and their results roll on based on conditions all, there's no beginning can be seen, just as with a seed and a tree. So it's just like there's a seed planted, and then eventually there's a tree. When you see the tree, you have no idea of the seed anymore. And yet once the seed is planted, sure enough, with conditions coming, this manifests. And this is really interesting because people in this process, and it said that karma can happen almost immediately. Now, immediately, I hate to use the word instant karma because it sounds like a drink, but what it means, it can happen really instantly or in this life. So by Buddhist definition, happening relatively immediately is right within this lifetime. Or it can happen in the next life or in future life. So it's said to have 3 dimensions where it ripens and then comes to fruition. And depending on all kinds of things, and it's not fixed, this can play out very fast or very slow. But eventually, it comes around just as this, I guess, certain seeds can bear fruit pretty quickly. What do you call those? Those are not perennials? No, what's the other perennial? Annuals. Yeah, so you have annual seeds. But you also have seeds that come back again and again, and you have some seeds that don't show up for a long, long, long time. In any case, what most people feel when the seed actually ripens, it's as if, what did I do? I didn't do anything to deserve this. So it's almost like you no longer see the cause and effect relationship. This is part of the the state of mind that the Buddha is describing, why the teachers are necessary, is because people lose sight of the cause and effect, the seed and the result. It's almost like it's unfair. People say it's unfair. How come so-and-so did that and they got away with it, and I did this and I get blasted? Or how come they live dissolute lives and they seem to be okay, and I'm living a really good life, doing all the good things, and I have all this junk falling on me? And what the text is saying is, it doesn't just work out on a day-to-day basis. And the problem is, and why cultivation is important, sometimes when you begin to cultivate, really cultivate holding precepts and doing some meditation and even some bowing practice, vision clears up a little bit. It's very funny how it happens. Suddenly you might see a cause and effect, and you go, oh my gosh, now I see the connection between I'm doing here, what I'm thinking here, what I'm doing here, what I'm feeling, or what's coming down on me. I can see how it is connected, some pattern of my thoughts, my actions, and whatnot. And at that point, and it's a very powerful point, that's the moment that change and transformation can occur, because you can make repentance and renewal. You can at that point say, damn, I'm sorry. I really do not want to continue to do that anymore. I know clearly it's off. I can even feel it in my body and my feelings and my, my neurotransmitters that this is throwing me off. Therefore, and here's the PowerPoint, I can change. Because without the possibility of repentance and renewal, this becomes fated, and there's no chance to escape these patterns. But with insight, even a modest insight, sometimes I remember my first one was on eating meat. It was like, whoa, I have been eating meat since I was a kid. And I could see the harm that I was doing to myself. I could see it, I could feel it to myself and others. And at that moment, I just became a vegetarian. Now, is my karma from all that meat eating in the Midwest gone? Probably not. There's probably remnants that are going to come. But I reversed the flow at that point. Now the rest of the waves will continue to play out, but I'm not generating new ones. So this is with very interesting. Master Hua's comment here, he says, the previous subsequent pattern, all that karmic retribution is similar to waves on water. The wave at the front pulls the wave that follows it along, and the wave that follows it pushes the wave in front. As soon as one wave passes, another wave comes. And when that wave passes, another wave comes. This is the way it all is. So he's describing this pattern. And again, these patterns are powerful, and at the same time, they're malleable. They can be shifted or changes. So that's why when you look at the biographies and autobiographies of some of the great cultivators, men and women, lay and monastic, you'll see much of the early part of their cultivation has to do with cleansing, purification. And by purification, I mean body, speech, mind, karma cleansing. Master Juri, I mentioned before, the great Tiantai master who wrote incredible treatises on meditation. For the first 20 years of his life, he didn't meditate at all, he just bowed. And bowing for that time cleared a ground so that when he brought his mind to focus, there was room for it to move unencumbered by the retributions. And these retributions are, people think my retribution is I'm poor, I'm sick, I don't have enough, illness comes. Retributions often are states of mind, anger that you can't control, jealousy, lust, pernicious doubt, not believing in yourself, not believing in the teachings, a kind of nihilistic abandon. These are actually retributions. It's not just it happens to the body, it happens to your emotions. And so the whole configuration, the matrix of who we are, if you could see it, would just have all these karmic strings attached to it. And what you're doing at the beginning of your cultivation, quieting the mind enough to see that. And that's why sometimes the beginning cultivation seems like a snowstorm. And like a blizzard, you say, oh, I'm going to cultivate, go to the monastery and cross my legs. And you're just like, no, there's not calm. Why is there not calm? Because the light from your practice is starting to show these patterns. And these patterns can be just doubt. Why did I ever come? I shouldn't be here. I'm worse than I was before. That's a karmic retribution. So it's like that's where the perfection of patience comes in. Absolutely essential at this point. Because if you know the teaching is solid and you trust it, and you know you have that capacity, then you can stay with it. And it will eventually sweep clean. So then we go to the next verse here, and this is verse 8. I won't make you suffer through my Chinese pronunciation anymore. I'll go right to the English. But if you're following here, it's the Shijian Suojianfa. So the dharmas perceived in this world solely rely on the mind, their host, which, following its notions, grasps at attributes or characteristics. This is inversion, upside downness, and not true suchness. So now, what he's saying here in the text is, even the things that we see, the phenomena we observe in the world, our very field of perception, and this is really critical, solely relies on the mind, their host. Ichi Wei Shen Zhao is the Chinese. Everything comes from this mind alone. And following its notions, which is really interesting, this is basically meaning uncritically swallowing these ego-bound understandings that we have. We think they're powerful insights, and they really are. But these are really filtered and distorted, almost like cataract visions. They're not true or genuine. But following these notions, and these notions mean basically Da Wang Shang, translated roughly as wrong thinking, not seeing things as they are. And as grasping out to this is upside downness. And Master Hua's comment here says, no one is able to recognize that his or her own nature is in a state of unmoving suchness that is full of understanding and eternally bright. This comes up again and again in the sutras. It's called miaoming, sometimes translated luminosity. You'll see this theme throughout the Shurangama Sutra, this called the inherent brightness, this wondrous brightness it's translated as. This being the nature, then the question comes from this: how does that get occluded? How does the pollution set into that wondrous brightness? What generates this kind of polluted air? I was just looking today at, I thought, last week, remember I mentioned Diwali, and that was, where was that? That was New Delhi. They celebrated the Festival of Light with all these firecrackers, and there were so many firecrackers the light went out. They couldn't see the sun anymore. And I just saw today Lahore has gone off the charts with pollution so bad that people can't even see each other. You can't see your hand in front of your face. And again, this is a metaphor. I don't mean to say it's identical, but it's a metaphor that what happens to our wondrous brightness, this luminosity, eventually the smog and the smog is generated by our factories of ego making and our attachments. And we are so busy doing this. We're so busy doing this. And we feel as if, wow, I just got more and more things I want to do, more and more, relationships I want to get into, more and more money I want to make. And we keep busy, busy, busy. And it's like this factory putting out all this smoke. And we don't realize that instead of getting those rewards, we're choking on the fumes of our own false thinking. Wow, here we go. Okay, so then we go to verse 9. Did you notice I'm moving along tonight a little bit? Okay, better take a break, give you guys a rest here. This one, next verse is a very interesting sort of cautionary and not, I wouldn't say, excluding. But it says, worldly theories and languages are all based on discriminations. Not a single phenomenon among them gains entry into Dharma nature. I would say the Chinese is very interesting. Wei Seng, Wei Seng, to me, sort of conveys like, it's never been the case It's never been the case that this kind of worldly dharma is going to get you there. Now, worldly dharmas are studied. And in the Avatamsaka, you'll see, and my teacher also, see that bodhisattvas study worldly dharmas. Why? Because they're bored. No. What they do is they study worldly dharmas to understand worldly living beings, because worldly living beings are made up of worldly dharmas. Our attachments, our fondnesses, our discriminations, our biases, our prejudices, our likes, our dislikes, even the various literatures and philosophies and religions and sciences we all have are this configuration of worldly dharmas through which we think of ourselves as something and we see the world. So if the bodhisattvas are going to teach and transform living beings, then they have to know their languages. And this language is not just their verbal languages, it could be their nonverbal languages, their art, their music. All of this falls under the language. Even their dreams, myths, legends, all of this becomes... So without learning that, they can't do the work of a bodhisattva. They're basically deaf and dumb. However, what this is saying, those things alone cannot get to this level of penetration. And so it doesn't gain entry into the Dharma nature. Gain entry is very interesting. It's, what's the Chinese here? It's, obtain literally entry, but it means to penetrate, to access. They can't get there. The image that came to mind when I was thinking about this, and this happens to me all the time, when I moved into my place now, there's a whole bunch of keys in a drawer. And I never want to throw keys out because I think, oh, these might do something. And I think the person before me had the same thought. And the person before me had the same thought. So there are all these keys. And I take all these keys, and 80% of them slip into the lock. They go right in. But then they don't actually turn. You know, only one really is the one. And I finally last week I said, I'm going to throw out the rest of these keys because they aren't opening the door. So it's like you have a number of things. You're reading this, you're looking at this YouTube video, this TikTok, you're watching these movies, you're into these fantasy games. All of these things give you a little something. I'm not sure exactly what that little something is. A little rush, a little relief, and sometimes even some insight. Sometimes some knowledge. They're not bad, but they don't completely give access to that, to the nature of things as they really are. And this is the double edge to that. On kind of one hand, they kind of get there and have the promise of getting there, but on the other hand, they never really get there. And it's sort of like a, how would you say it? Do you know the Greek myth Tantalus? Yeah, the Greeks are always being punished by the gods. So Tantalus did something the gods didn't like Prometheus. And they punished him by having him be on one side of a fence, being able to see these very luscious grapes growing on the vine and having an incredible thirst, but he could never get to them. And his punishment was to see them, and that's where tantalizing comes from. To see them and to thirst for them, but never be able to get them. Who is it? I think it's in the Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi has a wonderful line. He says, human knowledge is infinite. Human life is finite. To use what is finite to try to get the infinite, isn't this really foolish? And basically, this has to do, at some point, you have to kind of let go of that constant grabbing acquisition of worldly dharmas, fun as interesting as they are, and really get serious. Really get serious, and this is what it's talking about. Sometimes a near-death experience does that for you. You start to, for Walt Whitman, that was the case. When his daughter died, he had this insight. He said, all this stuff, all these fancies, all these things I'm doing, ultimately fall into emptiness in the face of mortality. And How long he changed, I don't know. But I'm sorry, this was Mark Twain. How long he changed, I don't know, but at least sometimes we get glimmers of that we're wasting our time, we're spinning our wheels on things, and we do it every day, and we acquire these things, in the morning we wake up and they're all gone again, and there's no fullness. It's like junk food. Anyhow, it's just very interesting. William James wrote something about on the deep matters of life and death, and this is what he says. This was, of course, 1900, 1909. You all know who William James was? Not the brother of Jesse. This is different. William James was a great philosopher, psychologist, taught at Harvard, published The Varieties of Religious Experience, one of the classics in Western religious studies. Interesting side story. After the Parliament of Religions, a fellow I was doing research on, his name was Paul Karras, decided to invite these enlightened masters from the East to come and do missionary work in the West. His idea was the missionaries are all going west to east. Why don't we invite the Eastern ones to come west? So after the Parliament of Religions were all the first time there was a world gathering of Buddhist and Taoist and Confucians and Muslims, he then underwrote them coming over here. And one of the first ones that he underwrote to come was D.T. Suzuki, who was 19 years old at the time. But he also brought over Dharmapala, Aranakarika Dharmapala. I don't know if you all know, look it up. Dharmapala was a very charismatic interpreter of Buddhist thought to the West. He was very young, very healthy and fit. The women swooned over him. People said he looked like Jesus come again because of his olive complexion and his lovely hair, and he wore a white robe. So he introduced the Anagarika role to the Theravada tradition. Not quite a monk and not a layperson, but somewhere in between. So because he had been taught by missionaries, he had memorized chapter and verse of the New and Old Testament. So when he spoke to Westerners, he could quote chapter and verse of the Old Testament, throw in some Buddhist stuff, and was very, very effective as a teacher. In any event, William James heard about him and invited him to Harvard to give a talk on his psychology class. And as he invited him up, he said, this person's psychology, Buddhism, is going to be the psychology of the future, not what I'm teaching you now. So anyhow, so James writes, for all that science has learned about the workings of life, death remains among the most intractable mysteries. At times, I've been tempted to believe that the Creator, meaning he meant by God, has eternally intended this department of nature to remain baffling, death, to prompt our curiosities and hopes and suspicions all in equal measure. So he's basically saying for all the science, and this was according to 1900, right, that we still don't understand the nature of death. And he would probably add, we don't know where we come from. We have very little idea of what we're doing, and we don't know where we go when we die. And he would also add, because he wrote about this, we have no idea what dreams are about. We sleep, we dream. A third or more of our life is spent in sleep and dream, and we have no clue why we do it. It's very interesting. So if we cut to the present, people are still looking into trying to understand this one thing that makes us all equal, which is that we will die. Unavoidable. It doesn't matter. So I'm quoting you from this, since there's a widespread community of near-death researchers that are getting more and more on the verge of seemingly discoveries about what happens when we die. Now, there's a neuroscientist at the University of Liège in Belgium. Her name's Charlotte Marshall. And she's done some interesting work, physicalist work on near-death experiences, and hopes soon to develop a new understanding of the relationship between internal experience of consciousness and its outward manifestations. For example, coma patients. What's happening when that occurs? And here's a quote from her. We really are in a crucial moment where we have to disentangle consciousness from responsiveness and maybe question every state that we consider unconscious. She is also in the process of doing this, starting to open up to what they call, parapsychological experience? Parapsychological study? Anybody know what that is? Not abnormal, but unusual. Unusual. Yeah, it's states of mind that seem to happen. We have evidence that they happen, knowing past lives, for example, knowing other thoughts, remembrance of things that you shouldn't be able to remember, things along the line of déjà vu, presque vu. Some of you have had some of these experiences. But also, they're kind of involved with, what's the other word for that? Psychic phenomena. But not the woo-woo stuff. I'm talking about stuff that they've been actually, they can document it's happened, they just don't know what it is exactly. So anyway, she's involved very much with this and has a radical different take on what they think they're poised to find out. And here she says, I think in 50 to 100 years' time, we'll have discovered the entity that is consciousness. That's pretty bold. It will be taken for granted that it wasn't produced by the brain. And it doesn't die when you die. Whoa. At the very least, these colleagues of this researcher say that such phenomena, however, and here we go, are inexplicable through current neuroscientific models. So this goes back to the quote, worldly theories and languages based on discriminations, they don't get at it. Whether this will happen, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical that in fact, and the reason I'm saying this is that these are all based on what Buddhism would call discriminations. The key that unlocks all this is called prajnaparamita, perfection of wisdom. So can science get to prajnaparamita? I wouldn't bet on it, but I'd be happy if that were the case. And I haven't, written this up, but every time I look at what modern science is able to do, it always comes one step forward, one step backward. It always partially penetrates, but never really gets at it. And I think maybe part of the reason is that Buddhist knowledge is not just changing what you're looking at, it's changing how you're looking at it, what you're looking through, which is your own person. So what you see is not simply out there, but it's through a transformed here. I once gave you that interesting quote. This goes back 2,000 some years. What we all wish to know is that phenomenal real world. But our means of knowing that is this, the person, the mind, the body. How can we really know that? Only by perfecting this. So I think until you get to that level of some level of the purification and the training of the mind in such a way that it is no longer discriminating self and other, subject and object, and get to this fundamental ground of prajnaparamita, which is based on the emptiness of phenomena, therefore it is the no mark seen, we're not going to get there. Anyhow, that's thinking of a line from Emily Dickinson. She's really quite good on terse. And what does she say about dying? Anybody know what she said about dying? There's one great poem she said about dying. I've seen death, but death will not stop for me. She says, dying is a wild night. Dying is a wild night and a new road. She put them both together. Anyhow, okay, number 10, we're going to do it. The force of conditions and that which pursues them bring myriad phenomena into being. Ephemeral, they soon vanish. without passing for an instant. This continues thought after thought. So basically, the force of conditions which pursue them, basically, these are the mental states and the random thoughts that we pursue and follow. They're ephemeral and soon vanish. And this is what Huineng means when he says, and if you're caught up in this, it's a frantic, frantic activity. We're constantly chasing these bubbles and shadows, thinking they're real. And even if we get a temporary hold on them, like a bubble, it pops. And I remember as a kid trying to catch bubbles in the bathtub. I only got the bathtub with actually cold water. Now, that wasn't because I was mortifying my flesh. It's because I had 3 sisters. They got the bathtub first. And because in those days, you only had one hot water heater, by the time I got to it, there was no hot water left. But there were still bubbles. So I try to get these bubbles going to ease the pain of the cold water. And I catch them, but then they pop. And I can remember, I think I cried once because I was really working hard to get these bubbles and they popped. And I think if I'd been enlightened at the time, I'd have thought, aha, everything's impermanent. Why am I doing this? A frantic passage through life only ends with broken bubbles. But I didn't do that. Anyhow, but now you see this continues thought after thought. They're ephemeral and so forth. Now go back, remember the Visuddhimagga passage I read earlier, where it says, while these deeds and the results rolled on, conditions all, there's no beginning can be seen, just as with the seed and fruit, empty phenomena roll on, empty phenomena roll on. So here you see a very close linking between what is considered to be a Theravada text and the Mahayana text. They're basically saying the same thing. Sherfu's comment on this, Master Wa's comment, there's this in this endless cycle of coming into being, ceasing, coming into being, and ceasing, it keeps going on like that. So it's sort of like Zhongsheng, living beings are also dying beings, Sisheng. Living, dying. This is what it's talking about. Multitudes of births and multitudes of death. And I would say probably also this is quantity and quality. So there's quantity, multiple births, quantity, multiple deaths, but there's also quality, different kinds of birth, and quality, different kinds of death. So you're getting a whole rich thing here, but this is interesting. Buddhism is going a little further than the scientific stuff I just read you. It's actually positing that there's some knowledge that we have that can be passed on and you can directly access, that you experience and know this directly. It's no longer guesswork. Most of the ancient philosophers basically did guesswork along these lines. Socrates, for example, I'm trying to remember my Socrates here tonight. What did he say? I think I had something here where I wrote down. Hang on a second. Anybody remember what Socrates said about death? Dying? No? Hang on a second. It's worth, because we're reading him in classes at the university now. Students are reading Plato, Socrates. This occurs in what's called the Phaedra. It's written by Plato because Socrates didn't write.
You mean to fear death? That passage from your notes?
Yeah, there we go. So basically, he saw death as a transformational period rather than a beginning and end necessarily, and therefore said there wasn't anything to fear. But he said this is a quote from the Phaedra, "To fear death, gentlemen, is no other than to think oneself wise when one is not wise. To think one knows when one does not know. No one knows whether death may not be the greatest of all blessings for a person. Yet men fear it as if they knew that it was the greatest of evils. And surely it is most blameworthy ignorance to believe that one knows what one does not know." So again, he believed it was transformation, but at the same time he said, I don't really know. And this is the basis of him saying, therefore I'm the wisest man in Athens. Not because I know, but because I know I don't know. And then, of course, he set about to irritate everybody to show them that they didn't really know. Not a winning formula. Basically, he ended up being killed. But in any event, and then you have, I could quote another, let me call this up again. Do you all know Dylan Thomas? Ever heard of Dylan Thomas? Not Bob Dylan, Dylan Thomas. No? Okay. Two passages. I'll talk a little bit about this tonight, maybe. Because we don't know, the range of thoughts and philosophy on death and dying is all over the map. Okay? For example, Zhuangzi, do you know the famous Zhuangzi passage when his wife dies? I'll just read it. It's really, I love this passage. When Zhuangzi's wife dies, his friend Huizi went to convey his condolences and found Zhuangzi sitting with his legs sprawled out, pounding on a tub singing. Now, a tub means an update cooking, you know. And his wife's lying in the other room dead. And Huizi was actually shocked. He says, "You lived with her. She brought up your children and you grew old together. It should be enough simply not to weep at her death, but pounding on a tub and singing, that's going too far, man. Isn't it?" And then Zhuangzi said, "No, you're wrong. When she first died, do you think I didn't grieve like anyone else? But I look back to her beginning and the time that she was born. Not only the time she was born, but the time before she had a body. Not only the time before she had a body, but the time before she had a spirit. In the midst of the jumble of wonder and mystery, a change took place and she had a spirit. Another change took place and she had a body. Another change took place and she was born. And now there's another change and she's dead. It's just like the progression of the four seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. Now she's going down to lie peacefully in the vast room, not the room next door, but in a vast room. If I were to follow her bawling and sobbing and crying, it would show I don't understand anything about the nature of things. And so I stopped." Now, there's one. So basically, and I could read others. I could read other. E. Cummings has a wonderful poem to the effect of this. So this is not just East and West. But then you have on the same side, like Dylan Thomas, who writes this: "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." So he's just saying, no, fight it. Fight it. Do not go gently. And Zhuangzi is saying, it's just like the season. What are you going to rage against summer going to fall? Well, good luck. And so this is all over. But I guess where I wanted to go on this is maybe start this tonight and then we'll finish it perhaps next week. And I wanted to share with you this passage. One of my students just sent to me. It's a new publication. It's from something called Gold Wrapped in Rags. Gold Wrapped in Rags. And it's an account of one of the major disciples of Ajahn Bu and Ajahn Mun, the forest tradition monks. And this is Ajahn Jiakundo or Chundo. And it's just been translated. And so he's reporting from his meditation and his practice, he has seen now what is going on when one dies. And this is very interesting. Now, if I say, well, we're at 9 o'clock, I'll stop tonight. You know, and somebody say, but I might die this week and I don't get to. So I'm going to do a little bit of this, okay? He says, I'm quoting, "When the average person's physical and cognitive functions deteriorate to the point where they can no longer sustain life, the knowing awareness that instilled life into the body and mind at conception and maintained its living presence throughout periods of growth, sickness, and aging, when that all finally vacates, leaving a life's corpse behind." So he's describing the dying process of body and mind and just coming to an end. And he's talking about when the knowing awareness associated with that person's carries with it the effects of all intentional and good bad thoughts, speech, and actions, karma. So that knowing awareness, and this is the language he's using, sometimes this knowing awareness is translated as intermediate skandha body. So it's a very thin but distinct consciousness that doesn't have necessarily body at this point, but goes between bodies. It's said to be the first that comes and the last to go. I'm now quoting you to a Mahayana text. And this is associated with the repositories in the eighth consciousness. So as one dies, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body start to all, consciousness sort of remains, but then sixth consciousness goes, seventh consciousness goes. What's left is only eighth consciousness, the storehouse consciousness. And as that goes, finally, when the person dies, just this vague continuity of consciousness called intermediate skandha body, because it's not really a body, carries the karma, the seeds of karma, to the next birth. And this begins then the next person. So I'm interpreting past what he's saying here. He's saying the knowing awareness associated with that person carries with it the effects of all the intentional good, bad thoughts, words, actions committed during that lifetime as an ongoing legacy for the future. At the culmination of one life, this karmic legacy is duly transferred to the conscious presence of a living being in the next life. Stated another way, delusion creates the conditions for karma and its consequences, which themselves determine the circumstances and conditions of the next birth. This delusion imparts a karmic blueprint, he uses the word blueprint, that outlines all the qualities and character traits contained in that individual's karmic legacy, which is integrated into the knowing awareness that sustains life in the body and mind of a developing fetus. At birth, the karmic cycle continues with more actions and karmic results ad infinitum. And now we're going back, and it rolls on. Did you just remember the passage and the verses we use? It goes on continuously, it's like waves in water. This recurring pattern represents the never-ending cycle of samsaric existence. There's more, but I will pause here for now, because that's a little bit to digest. There's a couple more parts that are very interesting, and I'll continue with this next week. But it's very interesting. This is not text that he's quoting. These are insights obtained through direct practice. So this is a very interesting, it's not scientific in that sense, you see, because one can only run this experiment with a certain amount of prajna. This kind of scene is not something that you can, put in a test tube or write a paper about and have it tested, by people in scientific labs, because it goes beyond the limitations of the five skandhas. It goes into what happens after that happens. People that obtain the state can see this and go to and from these realms through the meditation process without dying, and also can have some mastery over it while and during the process of dying. So one of the reasons why you would develop shila, the purity of ethics and morality, so that the equanimity and stability of mind is really clear and centered, is to be able to enter and understand and see this directly. This is called not wasting time. This is not the frantic passage. It's not quick. You can't go online and just order it from Google, okay? This is something you have to cultivate in your own person, but the text is clearly saying that this is accessible. This is accessible. When it says the worldly discriminating mind never gains access to this, but the mind of wisdom goes right into it, enters without obstruction. So when it says, when one reaches the point of letting go of all attachments and false thinking, there's no more obstructions, no more impediments. And even if you don't want to, you're going to understand this. It's going to become transparent because it's just how things are at this level. And I say at this level because it's not really a level apart from the here and now. It's right within the here and now, but we just don't see it. you want to get out this idea that this is an insight that comes from being in some heaven. This is in his lifetime in the forest, seeing this very clearly in the here and now. And as you read other biographies, you realize this is reported again and again and again. This isn't just one person's thing. So at the level of Dharma and of cultivation, there is what we call an intersubjective testability. That's a scientific term. Now, intersubjective testability usually means you run an experiment on oxygen and you're in Berkeley. She runs an experiment in oxygen, she's in China, and you get the same results. It's intersubjectively testable regardless of any culture, norms, anything else. It's just there. So what I'm suggesting here from reading these biographies and whatnot, there's a level of this intersubjective testability going on with cultivators who again and again, and some of them are illiterate. Wei Neng was illiterate, and still, when somebody said, the disciples are crying, oh, you're crying, what are you crying for? Because you're dying. He says, are you crying for me or crying for yourselves? I know where I'm going. And so, well, how did he know where he was going as an illiterate? Because he had accessed this portal of understanding. He had actually attained this. So I just throw that out for tonight. Partly I do it because these texts are so rich with this. And rather than, I don't know how much time I got left to share with you, but I want to share as much as I can with you because I myself know that this is the great matter. This is what it's all about. And from my own limited experiences, would say this stuff is true. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. This is not myth. It's not fantasy. It's not hallucinations. These are not drug-induced states that they're talking about here. This is the real deal. At the same time, the only way to get it is the transformation of yourself. You can't get it from studying. You can't get it from reading. You can't get it even from memorizing. But once the mind is clear and the attachments drop away, the Buddha says it's clear as holding an apple in the palm of your hand. That's how transparently obvious it is. So, if you're interested, I'll continue this. There's a couple more paragraphs and go into this a little more next life. Oh, I'm sorry, next week. That was an interesting Freudian slip. But who knows, maybe next life, next week, it's all the same. Actually, never mind, I'm not going to. So we'll stop there for tonight. Probably do the transference in English, unless there's any questions or comments. Now make it within the realm of something I could possibly answer, because this is pretty heady stuff. I don't know. Don't ask me where I'm going. Yes, Jason.
Okay, Marty. I hope this question's okay. I was thinking about the last verse. Worldly theories and language are all based on discrimination.
What?
Are all based on discrimination.
Yeah.
Not a single phenomenon among them gains entry to the Dharma nature. And I was thinking about just language itself and kind of like what Heidegger said in particular about, are all language similar? I'd say even poetry, I guess I want to ask, is poetry within the same category, or is it kind of a little bit special? Because I'm also reminded that, say, when enlightened masters, when they become enlightened, they usually give a verse in different traditions as well. But,
all words and language are based on discriminations. Some are more clear and more vibrant and more indicative than others, and some are just confusing. But even the most precise of a verse, of an awakened verse, is still the finger pointing to the moon, according to the teachers. So the Avatamsaka says all words and language are basically false, but what it means are provisional. And yet we use the false to find the true. So they are expedient devices, but this is words and language, this text. But it's sort of like you have a magnifying glass and it clarifies certain things. you get the, what's a big telescope out there now? I forget what it's called. Hubble or whatever. Yeah, that you can see a lot more. So even I hold my binoculars up and I can see the moon. I can see some pock marks on it and whatnot. Cool. And then you get one of those telescopes and you go, oh my God. So the words and language, say, of the text are like this telescope, or in converse, like an electronic microscope. So they can really reveal in detail the nature of things. The binoculars, my glasses and whatnot, can sharpen it a little bit, but they don't have the reach. So words and language are all pointers to something, if they're used properly. Sometimes words and language are actually escape mechanisms to obscure and befuddle us. So this you have to be careful with. But even good sagely words and languages, the sages themselves say. Huineng says, guys, you're memorizing everything I said and you're missing my meaning. You're attached to the words and missing my meaning. So this is the skill with words and language. E equals MC squared is language. When God lets my body be, from each brave eye shall sprout a tree, poems like that, like, oh, wait a minute, when my body stops, it'll become humus for things to grow. That's kind of insightful, right? But both of those are language. Both of those are words and language. They only approximate. They only turn your heads towards something, but they don't actually take you there. So that's how I would kind of awkwardly describe words and language. Yeah, good question though. Okay, any announcements? Nobody's here to announce anything, huh? Kian, do you have any announcements? Anything coming up that we should know about, or things that have come up and passed that we should be unhappy and bummed about? Oh no, I'm not going to go there. Okay. Well, along those lines then, in a minute left, I just want to read something to you, if I can find it. Hang on a second here. I'm not going to go into a great post-mortem here on this. As a historian, this isn't the first time things like this have gone down. Sorry, guys. Let's see if I can find this. Yeah. Okay, so especially my earlier training as an American historian, I'm not the least bit shocked or surprised at what's going down. And I will also say this too will pass. However, I want to read you something, and you have to sort of guess, was this said today in the newspaper, or was it said at a different time? Here's the quote. I've been guided by the standard of John Winthrop. Do you know who John Winthrop is? John Winthrop was the founder of the early colony, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay, this person is saying, I've been guided by the standard John Winthrop set before his shipmates on the flagship Arabella 331 years ago, as they too faced the task of building a new government on a perilous frontier. He said, we must always consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. Today, the eyes of all people are truly upon us, and our governments in every branch at every level, national, state, and local, must be as a city upon a hill. And what he meant by a city upon a hill was this really beautiful shining, they call it a shining city on a hill. Constructed and inhabited by people aware of their great trust and their great responsibilities. For we are setting upon a voyage in, this time, 19-something, no less hazardous than the undertaken by the Arabella in 1630. You could say if we are setting upon a journey in 2024, no less hazardous than the undertaken by the Arabella in 1630. We are committing ourselves to task of statecraft no less awesome than that of governing Massachusetts Bay Colony, beset as it was then by terror without and disorder within. History will not judge our endeavors, and our government cannot be selected merely on the basis of color or creed or even party affiliation. Neither will competence and loyalty and stature, while essential to the utmost, suffice in times such as these. For those to whom much is given, much is required. Now, this is just who, when, what. You'd like to think this was yesterday. For example, John Kennedy. John Kennedy in a speech to the General Court of Massachusetts in 1961. But the language in here, you'll see the task of statecraft in a time of terror and disorder, terror without, disorder within. We have the terror without, we have the disorder within. History will not judge us on our endeavors, and our government cannot be selected merely on the basis of color, race, or creed, religion, or even party affiliation. So he's making an appeal to get beyond all these narrow demarkers. Neither will competence and loyalty and stature, while essential, suffice in times such as these. And then the exhortation, too much given, much is required. Step up to the plate and be a virtuous and good da-da-da-da. And here's an example of words used to point us and uplift us. So one of the joys of being an American historian is you can go to the past and pull out these jewels. I only regret that in this case I had to go back to 1961. Nonetheless, it can happen again. So I wasn't going to share that tonight, but I share it anyhow with you.
Hey, Marty, there's a question online.
Okay, I'm assuming it's a good question, otherwise you wouldn't be letting me have it.
How do you know if repentance is working?
My first and quickest answer would be that the urge to do it is already a sign that it's working. Offenses are made from the mind, yet the mind is used to get rid of offenses. When the mind and offenses are both forgotten and empty, that is true repentance in every form. So when the mind recognizes, wants to repent, that's 90% of it. Bowing in repentance without a mind that wants to is nothing. It's just turkeys can do that. You know. But actually, when you have that thought to repent, that's over halfway there already. And that's working because you had a change of heart. What does it say? The sea of suffering is vast, but a change ahead is the other shore. What that means is a change of mind, a change of heart is already the other shore. It may take a while to get there, but you've reset your direction. So that's why Master Juan, when we have assemblies, if somebody really had a moment of repentance, of shame and remorse, go. I mean, it was always like the spotlight would come down and say, this is where Bodhi comes from. It doesn't come from sitting long meditation or accumulating merger through recitation and memory, blah, 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 blah. It comes from changing the heart. And a slight change of the heart like this is already its efficaciousness. Then you know it's working. Actually, you know you're working it. That's a better way to look at it. Okay, let's do no announcements. I think the monks will be back next week. Who knows? They're coming and going, has no border. Heng Sure is back in Australia, but I think he's lecturing again. So will that be tomorrow night and Sunday? Online. Okay, and then hopefully we'll see some of you next week again. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.